What happens when a greeting card becomes an indictment on Mother's Day? A 70-year-old mother was handed such a card. She opened it in front of her whole family, her voice trembling with emotion as she began to read. But the words that followed were not words of love. They were a shocking secret, a cruel accusation that turned her into the butt of a joke on the one day meant to honor her. The laughter of those around her rang out. As cold and sharp as broken glass, her entire world collapsed. All because of a few lines on a piece of paper. When your dignity is trampled by your own family, do you choose to suffer in silence? Or do you stand up and reclaim everything that is yours? Let's discover the answer together in today's story. Subscribe to Deepu Cater Stories. Leave a like. And let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. The cream-colored card and the cold clarity. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 70 years old. And this is the story of the Mother's Day that changed everything. For a long time, I believed that if you raised your child right, gave them everything you had, your life's work was done. You could sit back and watch the seeds you planted grow. But I learned something on a sunny Sunday in May. I learned that sometimes, what grows is not what you ever intended to plant. The day started with the scent of cinnamon. I had baked my granddaughter's favorite coffee cake, the one with extra pecans. Just how she likes it. My hands, though spotted with age, still knew their way around a kitchen. Driving over to Clara's house, the Atlanta sun felt warm on my skin, filtering through the old dogwood trees that lined the streets of my neighborhood. Their house, the one I bought for them, was a pretty little brick bungalow on a quiet street. It had a porch swing. James, my late husband, would have loved that swing. Mom, you're here, Clara said, pulling me into a hug at the door. Her embrace felt a little stiff, a little rushed. I told myself it was just the happy chaos of a holiday. I'm good at telling myself things. Marcus, my son-in-law, leaned against the kitchen doorway, a coffee mug in his hand. He had that smooth, polished smile he always wore, the kind that never quite reached his eyes. Happy Mother's Day. Eleanor, he said, you're looking sharp today. It was an odd thing to say. Sharp, as if on other days I was dull, blurry. I am 70 years old, but my mind is still like a razor. I know what day it is. I know who the president is, and I know the difference between concern and condescension. I dismissed it, placing the cake on the granite countertop he and Clara had picked out. I had paid for the installation. After a pleasant lunch, filled with the bright chatter of my grandchildren, we settled in the living room. The kids sprawled on the floor at my feet, their little bodies warm and content. That's when Clara sat down beside me on the sofa. Her movements were too careful, too deliberate. We have a special card for you, Mom, she said, her voice a little too bright. She pulled a cream-colored envelope from her purse. It was beautiful. Thick paper, decorated with hand-painted hydrangeas. My favorite. I took it from her. My fingers, wrinkled and spotted with age, traced the outline of a blue petal. Oh, Clara, it's lovely. I opened the envelope. Inside, the card's printed message was full of the usual sweet sentiments. To the world's best mother, who sacrificed everything for us. A genuine smile touched my lips. But then, I felt it. Something else tucked inside. A sheaf of papers, folded into quarters. Crisp. Official. My smile faltered. I carefully pulled the papers out. The first words I saw were typed in a cold, black font at the top of the page. Petition for conservatorship. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. The cheerful sounds of the living room, the distant hum of the lawnmower next door. The giggles of my grandchildren faded into a dull roar. My blood ran cold. Beneath the petition was a glossy brochure. Its cover showed smiling, white-haired seniors playing shuffleboard on a perfect green lawn. Oakwood Senior Community. The cursive script read, "A place to live with dignity, dignity." I looked up. I looked at my daughter, the child I had rocked to sleep, the one whose fevers I had cooled with a damp cloth through countless nights. I looked at my son-in-law, the man I had welcomed into my family, the man whose wedding I helped pay for. They were both watching me, waiting. Their faces were masks of practiced concern. "Mom," Clara began, her voice soft, rehearsed. We've been so worried about you lately. Your memory, it isn't what it used to be. We're just trying to protect you. Protect your assets from people who might take advantage." Marcus put a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy, possessive. "We have to be realistic. Eleanor," he said, "this is for the best. For everyone. The best." I looked into the face of my own daughter, the one I sang to sleep every night of her childhood. And I no longer recognized her. Instead, I saw two strangers, calculating the value of my life, and I had to wonder, can love, when given so completely, become a weapon to be used against the giver? My hands were trembling just a moment before. Now, they were perfectly still. The shock, the hurt, it was all there. A screaming chorus in my soul. But on the surface, a strange calm settled over me. It was the cold clarity of a historian looking at a battlefield after the fighting is done. Finally understanding how the war was truly lost, I folded the papers. I slid them back into the cream-colored envelope with its pretty, hand-painted flowers. I stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate. My back was straight. "I see," I said. My voice didn't shake. It was a quiet sound, level, final. "I need to go home now." The legacy on Magnolia Street and a silent vow. I don't remember the drive home. It's a blank space in my memory. A 10-minute stretch of road that simply vanished. One moment I was standing in Clara's sunlit living room. The next I was turning the key in my own front door. The house was silent. It was a deep silence. The kind that settles into the bones of a place that has been quiet for too long. I walked into the living room and sat down in the armchair by the window. My armchair. James had always called it that. He was a good man. My James, a builder. His hands were strong and calloused. But they could be gentle. He could fix a leaky faucet, frame a wall, and soothe a crying baby all in the same afternoon. We met right after I finished college. Two young, hopeful black kids in an Atlanta that was still learning how to change. We didn't have much, but we had each other. And we had a dream. That dream took the shape of a little clapboard house on Magnolia Street. It was run down, neglected. The paint was peeling and the porch sagged like a tired old man. But it was ours. We bought it with every penny we had saved. James worked on it every evening after his construction job. And every weekend, I'd bring him sweet tea and sandwiches while he worked. Our little girl, Clara, playing at my feet in the yard. He tore down walls and put up new ones. He laid floors that didn't creak. He built a fortress of love and hard work for our family. That house wasn't just wood and nails. It was a statement. It was proof that we were here, that we were building something that would last. We were happy there. Those were good years. Years filled with the smell of sawdust in my baking, with the sound of James's laughter and Clara's little footsteps running down the hall. We thought we had a lifetime of those years ahead of us. You never think it will happen to you. The phone call, the one that splits your life into a before and an after. Clara was 15. She was upstairs doing her homework. I was in the kitchen, peeling potatoes for dinner. The phone rang. A man's voice. A foreman from James's job site. There had been an accident. A scaffolding collapse. He was gone. Just like that. The world didn't stop. The potatoes were still in my hand. The water was still running in the sink. But my world had ended. Telling Clara was the hardest thing I have ever done. Seeing the light go out of her eyes, it broke something in me that never truly healed. The days that followed are a blur of casseroles from neighbors and hushed condolences. But I remember the funeral with perfect, painful clarity. I stood by his grave, a cold wind whipping around me, holding on to Clara's hand. She was so quiet, too quiet. And as they lowered my husband into the ground, I made a silent vow. I made it to James, to God, to myself. I promised that our daughter would never know this kind of uncertainty again. She would never have to worry. She would never have to struggle. I would build a wall around her so high and so strong that no harm could ever touch her. I would stand between her and the cruelties of the world. It was a promise born of love. A promise born of absolute terror. I sold the house on Magnolia Street a few years later. It was too full of ghosts. I used the money to put a down payment on the little house I live in now. And I invested the rest. I worked my teaching job, saved every penny. Everything was for Clara, for her future, for her safety. When she first brought Marcus home from college, I thought my promise was taking shape. He was perfect on paper, ambitious, polite, from a good family. He said all the right things. He told me he would always take care of her. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. I saw in him the stability I craved for her, the life I had sworn to give her. So I helped. I helped with the wedding. I helped with the down payment on their first car, and eventually, I bought them the brick bungalow with the porch swing, a new fortress to replace the one James and I had built. I did it all out of love. I truly believed that. Sitting there in my silent house, the cream-colored envelope on the table beside me, I could still feel the fierce, desperate love that had driven every decision I'd made for the last 25 years. But for the first time, I had to ask myself a terrifying question. What do you call a fortress that your own child sees as a prison? The price of safety. After James was gone, my vow became my life's work. Every decision, every dollar. This was measured against a single question. Will this make Clara's life safer, more secure? I thought I was doing the right thing. For a long time, I was proud of it. I made sure she had the best tutors. I paid for summer camps that would look good on a college application. I bought her first car, a sensible, reliable sedan. I did it all on a history teacher's salary. It meant no vacations for me. It meant wearing my winter coat for 10 years. It meant turning down the thermostat until I could see my breath in the mornings. I saw these things not as sacrifices, but as investments in her future, a future free of the kind of fear I had known, a future she could count on. The first real crack in my fortress appeared when Clara was 17. She was a gifted artist. She could draw anything. The way she could capture the light on a person's face with just a charcoal pencil, it was a kind of magic. Her heart was set on art school in New York. She had brochures taped all over her bedroom walls, filled with images of messy studios and passionate, paint-splattered students. Her eyes would shine when she talked about it. It was a beautiful, impractical dream, and I crushed it. I remember the night we fought about it. We were in the kitchen, the same one where I'd taken the phone call about her father. She had spread her portfolio across the table. It was brilliant, full of life. Mom, just look, she pleaded. The Savannah College of Art and Design offered me a partial scholarship. I looked at the drawings, but I didn't see art. I saw uncertainty. I saw a life of struggle, of chasing gallery shows and waiting tables. I saw the opposite of the safe world I had promised James I would build for her. Clara, honey, I started, my voice gentle. Being an artist is not a career. It's a hobby. You need something stable, something you can depend on. It's not a hobby. Mom, it's who I am, her voice rose, filled with a passion I hadn't heard before. Who you are as a smart young woman who needs a real profession. I said, my own voice firming up. Nursing school. Now that's a future. You'll always have a job. You'll help people. It's respectable. Her face crumbled. This is my life. Not yours, she yelled, tears streaming down her cheeks. You can't plan out every second of it for me. I am your mother, I yelled back, the fear rising in my throat. It is my job to protect you. She swept her beautiful drawings off the table. The papers scattered across the linoleum floor like fallen leaves. She ran to her room, and the slam of her door echoed through our little house. It was the first time she had ever raised her voice to me like that. She enrolled in nursing school that fall. She never mentioned art school again. And a part of her, the part that shone so brightly, seemed to go quiet. I told myself it was for the best. I told myself she would thank me one day. Years later, when she and Marcus were married and talking about starting a family, they were struggling to save for a down payment. Atlanta's housing market was unforgiving. I watched them stress over every penny, saw the worry lines forming around Clara's eyes. They were the same lines I used to see on my own face in the mirror. So, I did what I thought a good mother should do. I went to the bank. I took out nearly every dollar I had carefully invested from the sale of the Magnolia Street house. My nest egg, the money I had saved for my own old age. I wrote them a check and presented it to them one Sunday evening. This is for your house, I said, my heart swelling with pride. A place for my grandchildren to grow up safe. Clara cried. Marcus looked stunned. They bought the brick bungalow with the porch swing. And I thought, I've done it. My promise to James is fulfilled. She's safe. The price of my own security seemed a small one to pay for hers. I believed I had given her the greatest gift of all. Stability. A home. A future without financial worry. But now, sitting in my quiet living room, the memory of that cream-colored envelope burning on the table beside me, I have to wonder, in my quest to give her a safe harbor, did I build her a fortress or a cage? I gave her everything I thought she needed. Stability. A home. A future free of worry. But maybe, just maybe, the one thing she truly wanted was the one thing I never gave her. Freedom. I would honestly like to know what you think, as parents. Where do we draw the line between protecting our children and controlling them? Please, leave a comment below. I will read every single one. The whispers and the stage play. Sleep did not come to me that night. I sat in my armchair as the darkness outside the window deepened, then softened into the gray light of dawn. The house was cold. I should have turned up the heat, but I didn't. The chill felt appropriate. It matched the one that had settled deep inside my bones. The shock from the day before had worn off. In its place, something else was taking root. A cold, hard anger. But it wasn't the loud, screaming kind. It was quiet, focused. The history teacher in me was awake now. The part of my mind that knows how to look at a collection of scattered facts and piece them together into a story. And the story that was emerging was an ugly one. My mind started to sift through the past 6 months, not with the soft focus of memory, but with the sharp eye of an investigator looking for clues. And the clues were everywhere. I had just refused to see them. There was that afternoon in March. Marcus had come over, unannounced. He said he was just checking in. He found me at the dining room table, trying to sort through a box of old financial statements for tax season. "Let me help you with that, Eleanor," he'd said, his voice smooth as honey. These things can be so confusing. He sat with me for over an hour, laying out my bank statements, my investment portfolio, my pension documents. Because into May Crower, he asked so many questions. Specific questions. Who is your portfolio manager? Have you updated your will recently? Is this house in a trust? At the time, I thought it was just Marcus being Marcus. Thorough, in control. Now, I see it for what it was. Reconnaissance. He wasn't helping me sort my papers. He was assessing my assets. Then there was Clara. She had been growing distant. It was a subtle thing, a gradual cooling. Last month, I called to ask her to lunch. Our weekly tradition. "Oh, Mom, I can't this week," she'd said. Her voice was strained. "Things are just so busy. And you should be resting more. Don't overdo it." Resting, I walk 2 miles every morning. I volunteered at the library twice a week. I wasn't an invalid. She was pushing me away. Gently, but firmly, she was creating distance, making it easier to do what she knew she was about to do. It was easier to put someone in a home if you stopped seeing them in your own. But the final piece of the puzzle, the one that made the whole picture snap into sickening focus, came from a memory just 3 weeks ago. I'd stopped by their house to drop off some books for the kids. I let myself in the back door. Like I always did, the house was quiet. I was about to call out when I heard Marcus's voice coming from the patio. He was on the phone. His voice was low, conspiratorial. I only caught a few words, but they were enough, exploring the legal options. He was saying, "For an elderly parent with cognitive decline. My breath caught in my throat. I stood frozen behind the kitchen door. I told myself I must have misheard. I told myself he was talking about a client. He was a financial advisor. After all, it was a plausible explanation. And because I loved my daughter, because I wanted to trust the life we had built, I chose to believe it. I set the books on the counter and left before they even knew I was there. I had chosen ignorance. It was a comfortable choice. Now, that comfort was gone, burned away by the truth contained in that cream-colored card. Marcus was the architect of this. I could see that now. His ambition, his obsession with wealth and status. I was a problem to be managed, an asset to be liquidated. But Clara, she was not an architect. She was the stage. The ground on which he built his ugly theater. She was a willing participant, a silent partner. Her weakness. The quiet resentment she held against me for a lifetime of control was the tool Marcus had used to turn her against me. He had taken her pain and twisted it into a justification for his greed. My grief, the deep, soul-crushing sadness from the day before, was now hardening into something else, something solid and unyielding. It was resolve. The trembling in my hands was gone. My mind, the one they wanted to declare unfit, was clearer than it had been in years. I was no longer a confused old woman. I was no longer a heartbroken mother. I was a historian who had just uncovered the plot. And now, I would write the next chapter myself. The call to Samuel Finch. By mid-morning, the sun was streaming through my living room windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For hours, I had sat motionless in my chair, but now, I knew what I had to do. The anger had burned itself out, leaving behind not ash, but steel. I pushed myself up from the armchair. My legs were stiff, but my purpose was firm. I walked over to the small wooden desk in the corner of the room, the one where I used to grade papers, and picked up the telephone. There are times in your life when you need a warrior, and there are times you need a friend. Samuel Finch was both. He had been my husband's best friend, the best man at our wedding. After James died, Sam was the one who helped me navigate the confusing world of insurance and probate. He was a lawyer, a good one, with a voice as calm and steady as the deep roots of an old oak tree. I hadn't needed to call him for years. Today, I did. His secretary put me right through. Eleanor? His voice came over the line, warm and familiar. It's been too long. Is everything all right? And for the first time since I'd read that petition, the steel inside me began to tremble. To tell the story out loud, to give voice to the betrayal. It made it real, in a way my silent thoughts had not. No. Sam, I said, and I was shocked to hear the tremor in my own voice. No. It's not all right. I told him everything. I started with the cream-colored card and the hydrangeas. I told him about the petition, the glossy brochure, Marcus's careful questions about my finances, Clara's strained voice over the phone, the words I'd overheard from the patio. I laid out the evidence, piece by piece, just as I had in my own mind. I did not cry. My voice was low and even, but telling him, admitting the depth of the wound to a friend, felt like lancing a boil. It was a painful, necessary release. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He just let me speak until there was nothing left to say. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with the weight of a 70-year friendship. The vultures, he finally said, his voice a low rumble of disgust. I'm so sorry, Eleanor. Truly. I'm not calling for sympathy. Sam, I said, my voice hardening again. I'm calling for advice. I need to know my options. Of course, he said, his tone shifting from friend to lawyer. Legally, your position is strong. A conservatorship petition like this, without any documented medical evidence of incompetence, is incredibly difficult to push through. We can fight it, and we will win. Good, I said, but fighting isn't enough. I don't want to just defend. I need to act. That house, the one they live in, it's in my name. The deed is in my safe deposit box. Yes, Sam said slowly. It is. What would happen if I wanted them to leave? Another pause. Longer this time. You have the right to do that, Eleanor. We would have to serve them with a formal notice of eviction. It would be unpleasant. Unpleasant. That was a lawyer's word for it. It would be a declaration of war, an act that could never be undone. And my will, I asked. My next question already formed. It leaves everything to Clara. The house, the investments, everything. A will can be changed at any time, he said gently. As long as you are of sound mind, and believe me, Eleanor, you sound more clear-headed than anyone I've spoken to all week. His words were a comfort, but they also led to the heart of the matter. He laid out the weapons I could use. An eviction notice, a revised will, a restraining order, if needed. Legal maneuvers, cold, hard, and effective. But then, he asked the one question that wasn't about the law. Eleanor, he said, his voice softening back to that of a friend. Before we go any further, you need to ask yourself something. What is it you truly want as the end result here? Do you want justice? Do you want revenge? Or do you want a chance to heal this? His question hung in the air between us. It was the most important question of all. Did I want to punish them, a part of me? The raw, wounded part screamed, yes. I wanted them to feel a fraction of the pain I was feeling. But revenge was a bitter meal. And healing, could you heal a limb that had turned gangrenous? Sometimes. The only way to save the body is through amputation. I thought of my promise to James to keep our daughter safe. Maybe safety wasn't about money or houses. Maybe true safety was about living in the truth. Maybe it was about integrity. I want justice. Sam, I said, and the words came out clear and certain, without a trace of a tremor. But more than that, I want my freedom back. The freedom to live in my own home, manage my own life, and sleep at night without wondering if my own child is plotting to take it all away. And I want my daughter to learn the lesson of consequences. Then that, Sam said, his voice firm and reassuring, is exactly what we will do. The unsent letter and the official notice. After I hung up with Sam, a strange kind of quiet settled over me. It wasn't peace. It was the calm before a storm. You know you have summoned yourself. My path was clear, my decisions made. But there was one last thing I had to do, not for the lawyer, not for the fight ahead. For me, I went to my desk and pulled out a sheet of my good stationery, the heavy, cream-colored paper I saved for important correspondence. My hands felt steady as I picked up my favorite fountain pen, the one James had given me for our 10th anniversary. I intended to write a short, simple note to Clara, something to explain. But the moment the ink touched the paper, the dam inside me broke, and the words began to pour out. My dearest Clara, I wrote, I don't know who I am writing this letter to. Is it the little girl who used to fall asleep with her head in my lap, the teenager who argued with me about art school, or the woman who sat beside me on a sofa yesterday and handed me the end of our world? My breath hitched. The carefully constructed walls of my resolve crumbled. The historian was gone. The general was gone. All that was left was a mother. Do you have any idea what it was like after your father died? I wrote, the pen scratching furiously across the page. The silence in this house was a physical thing. I used to turn on the television in every room just to have some noise. I would lie awake at night, terrified. Not for me, for you. My only thought, every single day, was how to build a world for you that would never crumble the way mine did. How to make you safe. Maybe that was my mistake. I was so busy building walls to keep the danger out. I didn't realize I was also building a prison for you. I remember the look on your face when I told you nursing was a better choice than art. I told myself it was disappointment, but it wasn't. It was grief. I see that now. I made you grieve for a life you hadn't even had the chance to live yet. Was I wrong, God? Clara. I was trying so hard to be a good mother, a good provider. I thought that was enough. The ink started to bleed on the paper. I realized a tear had fallen from my cheek onto the page. I didn't wipe it away. I let it stay. A permanent part of the record. But that does not excuse what you have done. It does not excuse sitting there, next to your husband, and allowing him to call me mentally unfit. It does not excuse handing me a brochure for a place where people go to be forgotten. You looked at all my years of love, all my sacrifice, and you put a price tag on it. And then you decided it was time for a clearance sale. I must have sat there for over an hour, filling the front and back of the page with everything I couldn't say out loud. My pain, my fury, my confusion, my guilt. It was all there. A messy, sprawling testament to a love that had become hopelessly tangled and broken. When I finally put the pen down, my hand ached. My whole body ached. I read the letter over once. It was the truest thing I had ever written, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I could never send it. What was the point? To make her feel guilty, to start an argument, to beg for an apology she wasn't ready to give. This letter was an appeal to a heart that was no longer listening. It was a map to a country that no longer existed. To send it would be an act of weakness, an invitation for more debate, more manipulation. It was the old Eleanor's way of doing things, the Eleanor who fixed everything with more love, more talk, More sacrifice. That Eleanor was gone. I picked up the letter. I walked into the kitchen, to the old porcelain sink. For a moment, I just held it. This piece of paper was the last 40 years of my life. The last piece of my heart that I would ever offer up so freely. Then, I tore it in half, and then in half again, and again, and again, until it was nothing but a pile of cream-colored confetti in my hands. I let the pieces fall into the empty trash can beneath the sink. Aquiet. Final burial. I washed my hands, the cold water feeling good on my skin. I dried them carefully. Then I walked back to the phone. I picked it up and dialed Sam's number. This time, there was no tremor in my voice. There was no hesitation. There was only the cold, hard clarity of the task ahead. "Sam," I said when he answered. "It's Eleanor." There was a brief pause. "Are you sure?" he asked, as if he knew what I had just been through. "I'm sure," I said. "Send the notice." The storm on Magnolia Street. The official notice was delivered by a courier on a Tuesday. I knew, because I watched the discreet white van pull up to their curb from my living room window. I knew the storm would not take long to reach my shore. It arrived on Wednesday evening. I heard the screech of tires first, followed by the slamming of car doors. A moment later, the doorbell began to ring, not just a polite press, but a series of long, angry buzzes, one after another. I took a deep breath. I smoothed the front of my dress. Then, I walked to the door and opened it. They stood there on my porch, two figures silhouetted against the setting sun. Clara's face was pale and blotchy, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and fury. Marcus stood beside her, his handsome face twisted into an ugly mask of rage. He was holding the legal document in his hand, crumpled into a fist. "What is this?" he demanded, shoving the paper toward my face. There was no greeting, no pretense. The polished son-in-law was gone. "Are you out of your mind?" "I think the document is self-explanatory," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. I did not invite them in. I stood my ground in the doorway. "You're kicking us out," Clara's voice was a choked whisper. "Your own family, your grandchildren, this is my house." "Clara," I said, looking directly at her. "The one you were trying to take from me, along with everything else." That's when Marcus lost control. "You don't get it, do you?" he spat, stepping forward until he was towering over me. "I was trying to save this family. I lost money, a lot of money. An investment went bad. We're facing foreclosure on our cars. Mountains of credit card debt. We were going to lose everything." So there it was. Not a concern for my health. Not a fear for my cognitive decline. Just raw, desperate greed. A hole so deep he was willing to bury his mother-in-law in it just to climb out. "Your bad investments are not my emergency, Marcus," I said, the coldness in my own voice surprising me. "This is your fault," he shouted. "If you had just helped us out, been a normal mother, none of this would have happened. But no. You have to control everything." I expected Clara to be horrified by his outburst. I expected her to defend me, to at least flinch at the venom in his voice. But she didn't. Instead, something inside her seemed to snap. Her head jerked up, and she looked at me, her eyes burning with a pain so old and so deep, it stunned me into silence. "He's right," she said, her voice shaking with a lifetime of unshed tears. "You want to talk about control? Mom, you want to talk about taking someone's life away?" She took a step forward, her hands clenched at her sides. "I was a good artist," she said, each word a separate, sharp blow. "I was, but you couldn't stand it. You couldn't stand the thought of me having a life that you hadn't planned, a life that wasn't safe." "Clara, that's not true," I started, but she cut me off. "Isn't it? You killed that part of me. Mom, you took my passion and you buried it under a sensible nursing degree and a mortgage you paid for. You taught me that my own dreams were dangerous. You taught me that a woman's only real value was in her stability." Her voice cracked, turning into a raw, ragged sob. "So don't you dare stand there and act surprised when I finally learned your lesson. I was just trying to survive. The only way you ever taught me how. By clinging to safety, by controlling the assets. I was just doing what you did to me." The world stopped. The sound of traffic on the street, the chirping of the evening birds. Everything just ceased. Her words struck me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs and the certainty from my soul. She was wrong. She was twisting things. But she was also right in her tear-streaked, furious face. I saw the ghost of the 17-year-old girl with the brilliant portfolio. I saw the passion I had extinguished. I saw the beautiful, impractical dream I had, crushed under the weight of my own fear. I had been so focused on Marcus's greed that I had never stopped to look at Clara's pain, her brokenness, a brokenness I had helped create. They stood there for another moment, the three of us caught in a terrible, silent tableau of our own making. Then, without another word, they turned and walked away. I watched them get into their car and drive off, leaving me alone in the doorway. They left me there in the silence of my home. Clara's words echoed in the empty rooms, cutting deeper than any legal document ever could. I sat in my armchair, a 70-year-old woman, realizing that the fortress I had built to protect my daughter had also been the prison that had trapped us both. If you have listened this far, please help me by comment "I'm still here" in the comments below, just so I know that I still have friends walking with me on this journey. Your presence is the greatest encouragement for me to tell the final part of my story. Echoes in an empty house. The days that followed the storm were quiet. Too quiet. The righteous anger that had propelled me forward, that had felt like a solid armor around my heart, was gone. It had been washed away by the raw truth in Clara's words. All that was left was a vast, hollow exhaustion. I moved through the rooms of my house like a ghost haunting the scenes of a happier life. I'd put the kettle on for tea and find it hours later, cold on the stove. I'd pick up a book, one of my beloved histories, and read the same page 3 or 4 times, the words dissolving into meaningless shape. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, weighted with unspoken regrets. It was filled with the echoes of my daughter's accusation. "You killed that part of me, Mom." My anger at her had vanished. It had been replaced by a sorrow so profound it felt like a physical weight in my chest. You cannot stay angry with an echo of your own mistakes. You can only grieve. I grieved for the relationship I thought I had, a sturdy brick house that was revealed to be a facade. I grieved for the daughter whose vibrant, artistic soul I had failed to nurture, and in the deepest, most honest corners of my heart, I grieved for the mother I had failed to be. I saw it all so clearly now, in the unforgiving light of what had happened. My fear, a wild thing born in the sudden, violent silence after James's death, had become a suffocating blanket. I had mistaken its weight for the comfort of a shield. In my desperate, single-minded quest to protect Clara from the uncertainties of life, I had inadvertently protected her from life itself. I had paved her road so smoothly that she had never learned how to navigate a crack in the pavement on her own. I had to accept my part in it. It was a bitter, jagged pill to swallow, but it was the truth. My constant intervention, my well-intentioned control, had been the fertile ground in which Marcus's greed had taken root and flourished. I had, in my own way, weakened her defenses, made her doubt the validity of her own instincts, and he had simply stepped into the void I so carefully created. He was the predator, yes, but I had raised the lamb to be unafraid of the wolf. I replayed the scene on the porch 100 times a day. I saw the desperate, cornered look in Marcus's eyes, the wild panic of a man whose schemes were unraveling. But it was Clara's face I couldn't get out of my mind. The raw pain, the years of resentment finally boiling over in a scalding torrent. I had seen her as a conspirator in a plot against me, but maybe she was just another victim of it. A victim of his manipulation, and a victim of mine. The phone rang on Friday afternoon, its shrill sound slicing through the thick silence of the house. It startled me so badly I nearly dropped my cup. I stared at it, my heart pounding. I didn't have the strength for another confrontation, another wave of anger. But something, a flicker of a mother's hope I couldn't quite extinguish, made me pick it up. "Grandma," a small, tentative voice said. It was David, my oldest grandson. He was 12. He had his father's intelligence, but his mother's gentle heart. "David, honey, is everything all right?" My own heart immediately started to race. a frantic bird beating against my ribs. I don't know, he said. His voice hushed. So quiet I had to strain to hear. It was the sound of a child trying to be invisible. Mom and Dad are fighting. A lot. Dad is yelling about money. And about the house. There was a pause. I could hear him take a shaky, wet breath. Grandma, Mom has been crying. For days. She stays in her room. Oh, baby, I whispered, my own throat tightening with unshed tears. I pictured him, alone in a hallway, twisting the phone cord in his hands. She didn't want to do it, he said, the words rushing out now in a torrent of confession. The papers. For you. The card. I heard them arguing a few weeks ago. Mom said it was wrong. She said you deserved better than that. She said she wouldn't do it. I sank down into the little needlepoint chair by the phone, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. The room seemed to tilt, but Dad said, David's voice dropped even lower, to a fearful whisper. He said if she didn't help him, he would leave. He told her he would tell the judge that she was an unstable mother because she was so sad all the time, and that he would make sure she never saw me and Sarah again. The world stopped. It simply stopped. The words of a 12-year-old boy had just ripped away the final veil, revealing a horror far uglier than I had imagined. It wasn't just about greed. It was about possession. It was about absolute, cruel control. Marcus hadn't just manipulated Clara's old resentments. He had put a gun to the head of her greatest love, her own children, and used it as a weapon against her. He had threatened to inflict on her the very thing I had spent my entire life trying to prevent, to leave her utterly alone and take everything she loved. The sorrow in my chest was consumed by a fire, a clean, righteous fury. My anger returned, but it was different now. It was not the wounded anger of self-pity. It was for my daughter. It was the primal rage of a mother seeing her child in the grip of a predator. All this time, I had been fighting a war on the wrong front. My enemy wasn't my daughter's weakness. It was my son-in-law's evil. David, you are a very, very brave boy for telling me this, I said, my voice steady now, infused with a new, unshakable purpose. You did the right thing. Is your mom there? She's in her room, he whispered. The door is closed. Okay. Honey, it's gonna be all right. I promise. You just be good for your mom. Okay, Grandma loves you more than words can say. I hung up the phone. My heart was broken, shattered into a million pieces. For Clara, trapped in a cage I couldn't see. For my grandchildren, living in a house filled with fear. For this terrible, tangled mess my own misguided love had helped create. I wanted to get in my car, drive over there, and tear my daughter from that house. I wanted to tell her to pack a bag, to bring the kids, to come home, but I knew I couldn't. The brutal irony was that my harshest action was now my only act of love. My decision about the house. It had started as an act of self-preservation. Now I saw it was something else entirely. It was the only lifeline I could throw her. As long as Marcus controlled their finances, their home, he controlled her. The eviction was not a punishment anymore. It was a forced emancipation. To give her back the house now would be to hand her back to her jailer. To lock the door behind her, she had to be free of him. And to do that, she first had to be free of the house. Free of the financial ties that bound them together. Free of the very safety net I had so proudly and so foolishly built. It was the hardest act of love I would ever have to commit. An act that looked, from the outside, exactly like cruelty. I would have to let her fall. And pray to God that after all these years, she would remember she had wings. Selling the past. Buying a future, the 60 days stipulated on the eviction notice passed in a blur of quiet determination. There were no more angry confrontations. There were no pleading phone calls. There was only a heavy, stretching silence between my house and theirs. I knew from Sam that Marcus had hired a lawyer, who had quickly informed him they had no legal ground to stand on. The house was mine. The law was clear. Their fight was over before it began. During that time, I did not sit and wait. I acted. My conversation with my grandson had lit a fire under me, burning away the last vestiges of grief and replacing it with a clear, unwavering purpose. I was no longer just defending my territory. I was clearing a path for Clara and for myself. The first step was the hardest. I called a real estate agent and put the brick bungalow Clara's house on the market. The agent was a brisk, inefficient woman who saw only square footage and property values. She didn't see the ghost of my granddaughter's first steps in the hallway, or the faint pencil marks on a doorframe measuring her height through the years. Walking through it one last time with the agent, I felt a pang of sorrow, not for the house itself, but for the dream it had represented, a dream of safety that had curdled into something else entirely. The house sold in less than a week. It was a clean, cash offer. The closing was scheduled for the end of the month. The transaction was swift, impersonal, and final. The second step was for James. And for the 17-year-old girl with the brilliant portfolio, I met with Sam and my financial advisor. I took a significant portion of the proceeds from the sale, along with a part of my own investments, and I created something new. We drew up the papers to establish a charitable trust. I called it the James Vance Memorial Scholarship for the Arts. Its purpose was simple: to provide a full 4-year scholarship each year to a promising young artist from a low-income family in Atlanta. It was a legacy of creation, a direct answer to the destruction that had taken place in my family. It was my way of turning my deepest regret into someone else's opportunity. It wouldn't fix what was broken between me and Clara. I knew that. But it felt like planting a tree in a wasteland. It was an act of hope. The final step was for me. I had spent my entire adult life in Atlanta. It was my home, filled with memories of my husband, my career, my daughter's childhood. But those memories were now intertwined with the pain of the last few months. The city felt haunted. I needed a new landscape, a place with no ghosts. I started looking online, not for anything grand. I looked for a small place, easy to care for, in a town where the sun shone more often than it rained. I found it in a little community just outside of Savannah. A 2-bedroom condo on the second floor with a screened-in porch that looked out over a marsh filled with egrets and herons. It was only a few hours' drive from Atlanta, but it felt a world away. I made an offer, and it was accepted. I was selling the past and buying a future. My future. On the day before the movers were scheduled to come, I sat in my nearly empty living room, surrounded by boxes labeled kitchen, books, memories. There was one last phone call I had to make. My hand trembled slightly as I dialed Clara's cell number. I didn't know if she would answer. She did. On the third ring. Hello. Her voice was flat, tired. Clara, I said. It's Mom. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear her breathing. What do you want? She finally asked. There was no anger in her voice, only a profound weariness that mirrored my own. I didn't answer her question directly. I didn't talk about the house, or Marcus, or the terrible things that had been said. I wanted to tell you something, I began. My own voice, quiet and steady. I've established a scholarship fund, in your father's name. It's for young artists from the city who can't afford college. It will pay for their tuition, their supplies, everything. Another silence. This one was different. It was filled with something I couldn't quite name. I know it's too late for a lot of things. I continued, choosing my words with care. I know I can't go back and change the choices I made, for either of us. But I wanted you to know that I finally understand what a gift you had. What a beautiful, precious gift it was. And I am so sorry that I was too afraid to see it. I could hear a soft sound, like a choked sob, on the other end of the line. But I didn't press. I didn't ask for forgiveness or offer excuses. That wasn't what this call was about. I just wanted you to know, I said, my voice softening, that I've learned my lesson. I'm moving tomorrow, to a little place near Savannah. Moving, she whispered, the words sounding fragile and lost. Yes, I said. It's time for me to have my own life now, too. I gave her my new address and phone number. I told her I loved her. Then I said goodbye and gently hung up the phone. I hadn't offered her a solution. I hadn't offered her a home to run to. I had only offered her the truth. And my respect. It was a different kind of love. A gitter kind. A kind that finally, after all these years, felt like freedom. The view from 70. It has been 6 months now since the moving van pulled away from my old life in Atlanta. My little condo overlooking the marsh is quiet, but it is a different kind of quiet from the heavy, suffocating silence that haunted my house in those final days. This quiet is gentle, alive. It's filled with the constant, soft rustle of wind through the marsh grass, a sound like the earth breathing. It's punctuated by the distant, the lonely cry of a seabird and the cheerful chirping of the crickets that begin their chorus at dusk. This quiet feels like peace. The boxes are all unpacked, a feat I was prouder of than I expected. My books, my old friends, line the built-in shelves, their familiar spines, a comforting tapestry of my life as a reader and a teacher. My husband's picture, the one of him laughing on the half-finished porch of our house on Magnolia Street, sits on my nightstand. It's the first thing I see in the morning and the last thing I see at night. And every morning, without fail, I make my coffee and take it out to the screened-in porch. I sit in a comfortable wicker chair and I watch the elegant white egrets hunt for their breakfast in the shallow waters of the low tide. I watch the sky change from bruised purple to soft pink to brilliant blue. I simply watch. For the first time in my life, I am not planning or protecting or providing for anyone. I am just being. I don't know the full story of what happened with Clara and Marcus. The lines of communication are not what they once were. I know, from my grandson David, who calls me every Sunday with a faithfulness that both warms and breaks my heart, that they moved out of the brick bungalow. They now live in a small rental apartment in a less fashionable part of town. He doesn't talk about his father much, and I don't ask, but he tells me, in his quiet, observant way, about his mother. He tells me she has started drawing again. He says they're just little sketches, done with a simple pencil in a plain notebook she keeps by her bed. He told me he saw a drawing of their cat, curled up in a patch of sun. He saw another of his sister Sarah's hands as she was tying her shoe. They are small things, quiet things, but they are a beginning. It is not my place to know more than that. The thick, sturdy rope that connected our daily lives has been cut. What is left is a thinner, more fragile thread, woven from a grandson's weekly phone call and a mother's distant, silent hope. I do not know if our relationship will ever be truly mended. Some things, once broken, can never be made whole again in the same way. They can only be understood, and perhaps, over a great deal of time, forgiven. I have come to accept that. The searing anger I felt is gone. So is the consuming, hollow grief. They have been replaced by a kind of quiet wisdom, the kind you can't learn from books. It's the kind you can only earn by walking through fire and coming out the other side. You don't come out unscathed. You carry the scars. The smell of smoke lingers in your memory, but you are no longer afraid of the flames. Sitting here, on my porch, at 70 years old, I've had a lot of time to think about what I've learned, about love, and fear, and the complicated, messy business of being a parent and a child. I've learned that the most powerful love, the most profound love, sometimes has to express itself by letting go. For years, I thought my job as a mother was to build a smooth, straight, well-lit road for my daughter to walk on. I thought I was protecting her from the world's sharp edges and dark corners, but a life without obstacles is a life without strength. A muscle that is never tested atrophies. A soul that is never challenged cannot grow. Our job, I see now, isn't to pave the road for our children. It's to give them a map and a compass, to teach them how to read the stars, and to instill in them the confidence to navigate the rough terrain for themselves. It's to love them enough to trust them with their own journey, no matter how much the thought of them stumbling terrifies us. I also hope, in the deepest part of my heart, that children can one day learn to see their parents not as providers or obstacles, not as saints or villains, but simply as people, as flawed, complex human beings, shaped by their own unspoken scars and their own private fears. Gratitude isn't about blind obedience or paying back a debt. It's about understanding and true adulthood. I think begins the day you realize that your parents do not owe you a perfect life. They only owe you the best they knew how to give. And sometimes, tragically, their best is not enough. And perhaps the biggest lesson, the one that I hold on to in the quiet of the morning, is this. We live in a world that is constantly trying to assign us a value based on our bank account, on our job title, on our age, on our usefulness to others. That cream-colored card and the petition inside it tried to tell me my value had expired. It tried to reduce my entire existence, my love and my labor, to a simple, cruel word burden, but it was wrong. In this world, the most revolutionary, the most courageous act you can commit is to decide your own worth. It is to look at your own life, with all its mistakes and triumphs, its joys and its deep sorrows, and to declare it precious, not because of what you can give to others, not because of who you are to anyone else, but simply because it is yours. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 70 years old. My story isn't one of perfect victory or easy, happy endings. It is a quiet story of survival, of learning, and of finding my way back to myself. And it is, at long last, my own, and I am finally at peace with it. Eleanor's story is now told, but the questions she faced about love, control, and freedom remain for all of us. What would your final chapter have looked like? Leave your answer in the comments below. If you believe in the power of stories like this, show your support with a like and subscribe to Deepu Cater Stories, because our library of secrets is only just beginning to open. I'll meet you here next time. Be ready. You never know whose life we'll be stepping into.